Welcome back everyone, I'm xDuoo and today we're going to check something unusually cool. Something that caters a lot more to music lovers rather than audiophiles, but don't worry, we still get some technicalities, just not a lot of them. About 16 years ago I bought an R2R ladder DAC with a tube output stage. And at that time, 16 years ago, I was already juggling with R2R DACs, but having a tube output stage, that was something new. And that made the sound a bit juicier, dare I say creamier sounding than before, at the cost of not being as tight or resolving. Reviewing the xDuoo TA-32 feels like I'm 16 years younger. Interestingly, this is not just a DAC with a tube output stage. It can also function as a standalone preamplifier or headphone amplifier, and you can also mix and match these features working as a DAC and preamp or as a DAC and headphone amplifier. This thing is not cheap. This is the most expensive unit that xDuoo makes. It costs $999, but I assure you, every penny spent on this one will be rewarded with goosebumps and tons of countless of hours of music playback. I have a lot to say about this one, so let's check it out. I had a look already at their previous flagship devices like TA-30, TA-20 Plus, TA-22, so I know exactly what these guys are doing, but I gotta be honest, I have a deeper appreciation for xDuoo as a brand. I respect them deeply because they are not just some random engineers and tube aficionados, but also some guys that have a deep respect for the act of music listening. Because once you start listening to music, you just realize that these guys are definitely music lovers, not just some random engineers. I've been discussing with xDuoo for a while now, for several years now, about a flagship unit. This is currently their flagship unit, but there might be another one. I can't say much, but this is one of those flagship devices that I have envisioned a long time ago. And I'm very glad to have it right now on my table. It feels great to listen to it. I personally like big electronics because I know when you have a big case, you won't compromise anything. You have the space to use some higher quality components, and usually higher quality components are heavier and bigger. So this time around, this is the biggest unit by xDuoo, so we have nicer components inside, which I'll mention in a second. The build quality is fantastic on this one. Just hear it. It's rock solid, it's built like a tank. This is not aluminum, this is mostly bent iron or maybe bent steel, but it has those thick plates, so for me that's good enough. Since this is a Class A headphone amplifier, it generates a lot of heat, but don't worry, we have plenty of ventilation holes on top, on its side panels, underneath the unit, so don't worry, this one is getting just barely warm. I measured around 40 degrees Celsius after 8 hours of non-stop music playback, and 40 degrees is a very safe temperature for a tube amplifier and DAC. Although xDuoo had detachable tube guards in all of their past desktop devices, TA-30, TA-26, 22, 20, so on and so forth. These are not detachable anymore, but at the same time, it's so much easier to just carry around something like this. This is how I'm carrying this one. As for controls, we have 3 buttons on its front plate that will help you navigate that UI. We have a red painted volume knob, which is also helping you navigate that UI. And on the right, you can spot 3 headphone jacks, out of which 2 are balanced outputs. Looking on its back and seeing those RCA and XLR analog inputs, it becomes obvious that you can use this one as a headamp or as a preamp, depending on your needs. What's more interesting is that you can choose between 2 pairs of RCA outputs. One goes through the tube stage and adds a bit of tube flavor, and the second one bypasses the tube stage and offers you a more traditional hi-fi sound that you usually get from a DAC. Its UI is simplified, nothing too fancy or complicated. A long press on the menu button enters its UI, where you can select from 2 digital filters. The first one is your sharp roll-off filter, and the second one is the slow roll-off filter. You can adjust the brightness and the backlight. You can balance both channels independently, and when music is playing you can choose to see a spectrum analyzer or simple rate, and that's pretty much it. As for tech inside it, this is not just a Delta Sigma DAC based on the flagship ROM DAC chip, but you can also swap that DAC module if you want a different sound flavor. This concept was first introduced on the XD05 Pro, and the same modules can be used in here. As far as I know, 3 separate DAC boards can be purchased right now, one with flagship ESS Sabre DAC, one with flagship AKM DAC, and the one already installed in the TA-32 that uses flagship ROM DAC, which is considered to offer a much smoother and a sweeter sound. In case you are wondering how to swap the DAC board, you just turn it upside down, remove the 4 screws surrounding this metal door, and you'll gain access to the DAC board. It's really that simple. xDuoo is constantly developing new DAC boards for the XD05 Pro and also for the TA-32. They will soon release one based on that legendary Wolfson WM8701, and I hope to see an art while at the DAC board as well in the future. Secondly, this is also a proper headphone amplifier and preamplifier. We have tube rectification on this unit, very interesting, based on the most common 5U 4G. You can find this basically everywhere, which is very good. The voltage amplification stage, or the preamp stage, is based on these 12 AU7 double triodes by Ray tubes, which is very good, and the current buffer stage uses 4 transistors, so you'll be using those 4 transistors only when using it as a headphone amplifier. Those will be bypassed when using this one as a preamplifier. We have just 3 watts per channel in 30 ohms, but don't worry, since this is a hybrid headphone amplifier, we have a current buffer stage with transistors. Those 3 watts should be enough for most headphones, but more about that in a minute. Last but not least, xDuoo has been always very careful about the filtering stage, about the coupling capacitors, so it's no wonder seeing those big LNAS, Nikicons, and even their own branded capacitors. I forgot to tell you that it's Bluetooth enabled, so you can use those fancy codecs such as LDAC and aptX. But if you want to squeeze maximum performance out of this one, I do not recommend using Bluetooth. Sound-wise, a strong sense of nostalgia hit me every time I'm listening to music via this one, and since I was rocking speakers back then, 16 years ago, I decided to use this one via speakers first, working not just as a DAC, but also as a preamplifier, so basically bypassing my Chord Ultima preamplifier. And let me tell you that after hearing so many technical sounding DACs up to this point, all of those that try to be super resolving, super nimble, super fast sounding, having the darkest background, it's getting a little bit boring. And here, you know, having all those traits and all of the modern DACs. This one is not super resolving. This one does not have an ultra dark background. This one is not lightning fast sounding. This one does not have those traits. This guy does things completely different. And you know what? I really appreciate xDuoo for not following the crowd, for not following the trends, but doing what they believe is right. It's like looking in the mirror for me, because I try to do things differently compared to others. This guy is transporting me back in time, and while this is not an art while at the DAC with a tube stage, it does sound very much like one. Its sound is considerably softer compared to a traditional sounding DAC. It's not trying to shoot 100 needles per second into your ears. The trebles are gentle, the trebles are refined. The textures, however, are like 2 times more impressive compared to a traditional DAC. I pushed the volume much higher compared to what I'm usually listening, and while the sound pressure level went higher, I was surprised that the sound was never getting aggressive. On the contrary, it was soft, gentle, sweet, and effortless. Actually, the words sweet and effortless describe 90% of its sound signature, because there is no other way to describe it. Dynamics are sometimes tricky to assess, especially when you have a tube rectifier and also a vacuum tube preamp stage based on double triodes. But to my surprise, it was still pumping some dopamine when I started using some modern pop or electronica tunes. It was slightly rolling off some information from the upper treble past 16 kHz, but it was not doing so when it came to bass heavy music. There was still lots of rumble. The bass was not really the fastest or the most controlled or the most clean sounding, but there was still plenty of energy emanating from that region. The trebles are still there, but those are not trying to draw your attention, so sounding a little bit fuzzier or even muddy on several occasions, but of course you can improve that treble performance by using some better vacuum tubes. After bringing this one to my office, I started using some planar headphones, and I was again surprised that it was providing me a very different view over the bass. The bass was no longer loose or all over the place, but more like controlled, tighter, more articulate, improving my listening experience, especially via headphones. Once I swapped that stock rectifier tube with the KR5U4G, which is basically the best rectifier you can have for this amplifier, but this is very expensive, and also those 12 AU7 core with 12 AU7 select from Ray tubes, I was not surprised that the noise floor was going down, the background was darker, more information started appearing from my music, so it was becoming more detailed sounding. But what surprised me was actually a bigger soundstage, a bigger separation of the notes. The void spaces in between the notes were now bigger, and I know it's crazy saying void space and bigger, but it's like I had more air in between the notes, and it was more impressive not just on the X axle, but also on the Y and on the Z, so it was taller and deeper sounding as well. As I have already mentioned in my FiO K17 video that I posted just a few days ago, this one is definitely a 10 out of 10 in terms of soundstage, especially with these tubes, with the KR and also with the 12 AU7 Select. And that can be felt not only via headphones, but definitely you can hear that immediately, but via loudspeakers as well, maybe even much easier via loudspeakers. Absolutely amazing change, and that is simply immediate. Yesterday I went to sleep at 2 AM, not because I wanted, but because this fellow was not letting me go, especially after engaging my blues playlist. It's an absolute treat listening to old music via this fellow. The magic is definitely there, and combine that with an open, wide sound, and you start dreaming again with your eyes wide open. Let's talk about its headphone amplifier, as I know many of you will be using this one with headphones as opposed to loudspeakers. So in my case, I used some of the hardest to drive headphones that I have. These are basically my daily drivers. I use them everywhere in my headphone amplifier reviews. With the HE1000 unveiled and with the T+A Solitaire P, the maximum volume I could reach on this one on the high gain and balanced output was 55 and 60 out of 100. So plenty of volume was remaining on top. And mind you, I'm listening a little bit louder. I was arriving at 95 dB. Plenty of volume was still remaining on top, so it was easily driving this headphone. Some of that tube lushness and sweetness moved over, and of course from some ultra strict, ultra fast, ultra resolving headphones that are stopping on a dime, I've got a very different version of the HE1000 unveiled and the T+A Solitaire P. These were definitely slowing down a little bit, showing longer decays of the musical notes and slightly boosting their mid-range delivery versus a traditional solid-state headphone amplifier. The sound didn't lose control, and I must say that it was doing proper justice with these headphones. With HD800 it was a very similar thing, with the exception that it was slightly boosting their mid-range and also the mid-bass, and rolling off the upper treble, so making a much nicer version of the HD800S. The only two headphones that didn't work with this one were Susvara OG and Susvara unveiled by Hyphaman. It was still making them very loud, but as you all know, loudness and well-driven are two very different things. I was arriving at very loud SPL, like 95, 100 dB, but the sound was losing control. The bass was slightly distorted, and overall it was slightly entering in the clipping territory. Overall, I wouldn't use it with the most demanding loads out there, but it's the business with everything else. Okay guys, let's do some tube rolling. Let's roll a pair of 12 AU7 and also one rectifier, which I love very much. First of all, I want to say that teaming up with Ray Tubes was actually a very good idea for a couple of reasons. Ray Tubes is probably the fastest growing tube company at the moment. The build quality is very good and the sound is also quite good. Now, if you want to further elevate your listening experience, you can go with the 12 AU7 Select, which will cost you about $180 and I will leave a link below in case you're wondering where to get them. The build quality is even nicer on these. We finally get some gold pins, meaning that a better corrosion resistance, a better conductivity and a lower impedance, and also, unsurprisingly, a better sound. The 12 AU7 Select are lowering the noise floor, the background becomes darker, the resolution seems a mild jump, and you can finally start hearing some micro details coming forward. In my opinion, these are worth the asking price. $180 can be a lot, but I believe the performance is going up substantially. Next, we have the Kron 5U 4G, and we are already stepping into high-end territory with this tube because this one is basically half the cost of this unit. It costs $500. It's probably overkill for the TA-32. I bought a pair to be used with my Cain Soul 170HA, and I think they elevated my listening experience like nothing else. They do pretty much the same thing I already experienced with the Ray Tube Select, but the gain in performance is even bigger. The sound is right now completely noiseless. I have the darkest background right now with this one, and I feel that the resolution jump is at least 25% versus the stock rectifier tube. So it's a huge jump in terms of resolution, transparency and also noise floor. The sound is just clearer and much purer while still remaining sweet, lush and organic. It's the best version of the TA-32, but all of that comes at a price. Alright lads, this is not your uber resolving, ultra clean, lightning fast sounding unit, but you can make it so marginally with the right selection of tubes. It doesn't care about the perfect measurements, it doesn't care what other people think about it. It cares only about one single thing, making you feel great while listening to music. I know sometimes I'm quite poetic in these videos, sorry about that, but some of these units are making me so. So this is quite special sounding and it will forever have a special place in my heart. And if you consider yourself a music lover rather than an audiophile, then you know exactly what to do. That's all for today. Now go and buy some flowers for your loved one. Love, be loved, relax, go with the flow and everything will be all right. I love you all, truly, and I'll see you very soon. Cheers.